Welcome back. Welcome back to the Detroit is Different podcast. And today is a special episode. I say this often, but it's really a special episode because I have somebody that has championed a lot of things Detroit is different style, and also on behalf of Detroiters. And in this journey, in this connection, we definitely started from a origin of being in this space early on. I'm talking about like those candidate interviews that I was doing with the partnership with Riverwise Magazine. Make sure you check out Riverwise Magazine. Keeping things going, moving things forward, but without any further to do, I am offering the introduction of my District 2 Detroit City Councilmember, Angela Calloway. How are you today?
I'm doing good, Mr. Frazier. How are you?
All is well. All is well. So, with this, let's start usual Detroit is different style. Your people in the city of Detroit. How did your family make their ways about to Detroit?
Oh, wow. Well, my mom and dad, and thank you for the question. And I love talking about my parents who are now deceased.
Rest in peace.
They migrated here from Mississippi,
Okay, Mississippi, where?
Columbus, Mississippi,
Okay, where is Columbus, Mississippi?
near Meridian, Tupelo, 3.5 hours from the Alabama state line. Birmingham.
Okay. Okay.
And they came here in the mid-50s. They were newlyweds. My dad had just gotten out of the Army. He served in the Korean War. And he brought my mom here as his new bride. And they wanted a better life, a better quality of life. And he wanted a job. He wanted to be able to have a good job, a good paying job, and raise his children here. And that was not possible for him in Columbus, Mississippi at that time in the 50s and earlier, and still now, in my opinion, very racist state. And my dad experienced a lot of racism in his life. He died at 91 just this past October, so he had a long life. But he would often talk about his experiences as a little boy growing up in Columbus, Ohio. He was raised by a single mother.
So you went from Columbus to Columbus. Ain't that something?
Yep. He was raised by a single mother, my grandmother, Julia May Weathers, and he never knew his father. And he would often say, I wish I knew my father. But my grandmother, Julia May Weathers, never went back to where she came from Alabama. And from what I understand, she walked from Alabama to Mississippi as a pregnant young teenager. And how she made her way there, I don't know. Only God knows. But she was a survivor, and she raised my father with good values and ethics. She didn't have any other children. She never married. And she raised him as a single mother in Mississippi, bought her own home. It was a one-room home. You could see the front to the back, from the back to the front. She had an outhouse, but it was very beautiful. My grandmother, Julia May Weathers, was a master quilter, and she could sew by hand like a sewing machine. So a lot of the white folks in Columbus would have her wash their clothes and mend them, hem them, alter them. And she was able to buy beautiful furniture, which we call antiques now. She was able to send money to Detroit to her 5 grandchildren, myself and my 4 siblings. And she was a very independent woman. And I named one of my daughters after her. And she did a good job. My mother came from a home with 2 parents married. And they were the Hairstons, Hairston. And I say that because there's been a documentary on that side of my family, the maternal side of my family, where you had black and white Hairstons growing up together, what they called a farm, but it used to be a plantation, as first cousins. And so it's called the Hairston Clan, and that is a book. And there's been a documentary on public television stations. And I'm very proud of that part of my family. My mother came from a family of 10 siblings, and she just passed in 2018. So, I have their values. I have their work ethic. My mom worked until she retired. My dad worked for the same company for 37 years and raised my 4 siblings and myself in a very, 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 very small bungalow on Terry Street between Fullerton and Schoolcraft.
Okay.
Which, we were the first blacks on that street in 1969. And then I didn't know about racism. I was only 9 years old, going on 9 years old. And I didn't understand racism until I saw my white neighbors moving out. When we moved in, they literally start moving out.
So even and you're getting to a lot of the other questions I was going to get to, but even before we go there, I definitely want to just touch to stopping at the fact that in that journey, in those paths of the Great Migration, a lot of the paths of the Great Migration dealt with the railways. A lot of the railways coming to Detroit, you have so many people from when we think of the states that are further east. So you have a lot of people with Georgia, with Alabama sometimes, but like Georgia, Alabama, a lot of black folks really come from there to Detroit. So Mississippi, which is a little bit further west, has a lot of people in Chicago, Milwaukee, Minnesota. What was it about Detroit that attracted your father to choose Detroit? And I know he has a different animation too, because if he spent some time in Columbus, Ohio, that's
No, never Columbus, Ohio. Always Columbus, Mississippi. Never lived in Ohio.
Okay, so what was it about Detroit that drew him here? Because just usually a lot of the people from Mississippi would look at being in, like I say, the Midwest, further west.
Ford Motor Company and $5 a day. He said he came here to get a job, to take care of his family, because he knew he was going to have children with my mom, and it was Ford Motor Company. He wasn't really interested in General Motors. He was never interested in Chrysler. It was Ford Motor Company, and the guaranteed $5 a day. And he knew he could make it. He had gotten an apartment before he went back and married my mom and brought her here. So he was already ready. He just come out of the war. He saved his money, and he was able to rent a house and have it furnished for her when she came. But it was Ford Motor Company and the promise of a better quality of life for black folks. And that was his dream. He didn't end up working for Ford Motor Company. He ended up getting a job offer from Edward C. Levy, which is a concrete crushing company. They haul and crush cement and concrete. And he worked there for almost 37 years. And ironically, Edward C. Levy, which is headquartered in Dearborn, opened up a plant in Columbus, Mississippi. Having nothing to do with my dad. It was just
Just by happenstance.
By happenstance.
So that relationship down in Mississippi, have you ever visited there?
That's my second home.
Okay.
I'm very familiar with Mississippi. I'm very familiar with their politics. I'm very familiar with Columbus, Mississippi, because the majority of my relatives, first cousins, live in Mississippi.
Okay.
And my last surviving aunt and uncle live in Mississippi. My mother was the only daughter of 11, or child of my grandparents' 11 children, to actually leave Mississippi and not return to live.
So that the roots there have to run very deep. What's been the tradition of your family that stayed there in Columbus? What's the works? Is it more agricultural? Is it education? Is it
education?
Industry?
Education. A lot of my first cousins are teachers, they get in and out of politics. They have an understanding, but mostly education and working in some of the small plants that are located in and around Columbus, Mississippi. So there's not a lot of industry in Mississippi. It is a very impoverished, very small community. And how my cousins make it there, I don't know, because there's nothing there. I think a lot of them have to leave Columbus and go to like Jackson, Mississippi, or Birmingham, Alabama to work. But there's not a lot of infrastructure or businesses in Columbus, Mississippi. It's just not there.
Not far from there, another classic Detroit is Different interview. When I interviewed Roderick Miller, he led the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation for a while. Grew up in a small town from Mississippi, as I call it. Like, and my family has roots to towns like that in Florida. We call them I would jokingly say like the one store town, where like that person that runs the store, you want to get something after hours or something, you can just like call that person's house. Like, it's still a lot of towns in America like that. I would probably argue that most of America is still like that, as opposed to like the metropolis dwelling, which leads to your aunts and your uncles were not swayed to say, okay, I'm gonna come up here to Detroit. I want to try this big city life. I want to look at what opportunity was here. Do you think what was it about your father that was so different, and your grandmother? I would
Okay,
say.
determination, but several of my aunts and uncles did give Detroit a try. They stayed with us.
Okay.
So a lot of times we were living in a two-bedroom house, and how we made it, I don't know. But my mother would always bring up her younger siblings to live with us and to get work during the summer and just to give them a taste of living in a large city, but none of them stayed. I think they were homesick. I think coming from Columbus, Mississippi, such a smaller environment, it was overwhelming for them. But my dad was able to help my mother get used to it because he was becoming used to it at the same time. They were all from the same area, but my aunts and uncles who did visit with us and stay with us for a short period of time, Detroit was not for them. They liked what they saw on TV. They liked what they heard. They liked what they read. But when they got here, it was just overwhelming for them, and they were missing home. I did have one aunt who did migrate to Chicago with her husband, and he worked for one of the plants in Chicago. They stayed there, but she eventually
Went back.
went back.
Okay. All right. So with that being said, we stopped off on like this transitioning as many of the communities completely changed. This is one of those communities, and you were speaking to it because you witnessed this. In that community, when we think about that area, that's like a borderlining of when I think about that community, I'm thinking a little bit of Dearborn. I'm thinking McKenzie. I'm thinking that area is highly influenced by the Ford family, but the Ford family for like all families, not necessarily like this community close to Highland Park that was like, okay, this will be a cul-de-sac in a community for Black people, or Inkster, which I don't know if people know Inkster, Ink and Inkster Black, you know what I'm saying? Like, so like, but the Dearborn community was actually like that is the grounds, that's the space, the place that is really the place where the Ford family wanted to cut their teeth and have most of the community around. And even though they are family, so moving into a community like that, what do you remember?
Well, like I was saying earlier, when we first moved into the neighborhood, we are right there at Greenfield and Tyler. And just beyond that is Dearborn. I mean, we weren't on the borderline of Dearborn, but we were not that many blocks from Dearborn. So if you take Greenfield and once you cross Warren, you're in Dearborn. We were maybe 4 major streets from Warren. So we were close to Dearborn, but not like close enough to walk.
Wait, let me say this to my Detroiters, different people. Okay, so for you people that like clubbing, Joe Vons. Think Joe Vons. But continue. You know what I'm saying? People over there are probably like, it's a Wednesday. I want to get to Joe Vons. So continue.
Yeah, so I just remember not the Ford influence per se, but just because I knew we weren't welcomed in Dearborn. But my dad worked in Dearborn for those 37 years because that's where Edward C. Levy was located. But I knew he would, as soon as he got off work, he would come straight home. He wouldn't stop anywhere.
Wow.
It was that fear of being caught in Dearborn after hours. And my dad would try to describe that experience to us, but not really calling it racism and not saying that he was scared, but he knew that he could not be in Dearborn after he got off work. He would come straight home. Come straight home. He did not hang out in Dearborn because he wasn't welcome back in the 50s, the 60s, and 70s because he just retired in 1992, having started working there in the 50s, right? He wasn't welcome. After you get off work, you go home. And he knew that. So Dearborn to me is still not welcoming. Even with the new leadership there, it's still not a welcoming city, in my opinion, for African Americans. I remember going to a park off of Hubbard Drive back in the 80s. We weren't welcome there. We were not even allowed to be there. I don't know if it was a public or a private park, but I couldn't be there. And I knew it. I think that has changed, and that park was on Greenfield right around Hubbard Drive. And I remember Mr. Hubbard, I can't remember his first, Orville Hubbard, very racist. He reminded me of the gentleman down in Alabama. I can't remember the...
I mean, you can pick any of them.
Any of
George Wallace. I mean, like, let's put it like this. If you go back in America's history and you want to label anybody racist, you probably could, especially if we're looking at today's standards of it.
And I would compare Hubbard, I think was the former mayor of Dearborn, someone like a mayor down in Alabama during those times.
Yeah.
And he just was not, from what I remember and from what I've read and the atmosphere, it just has that non-welcoming, at least it did. I don't frequent Dearborn a lot
Mm.
because of my experiences, but I just remember him not being the most welcoming mayor
At
or
the
leader.
time. And for people watching this, to give a better context, like I say, that is the campus of where Henry Ford, like you have the Henry Ford Village, which is a collection of a lot of his historical pieces. And if you are a fan of American history, you can really spend days in that museum alone of just a lot of the artifacts that he purchased or ended up acquiring, you never know, over time. And it's a lot of the history of America is there. And not just that, but also the headquarters for Ford. Dearborn also, right now, currently, is the place in America with the largest Arab population. And that has its own layers in relationship to the black community. And this is happening in a time that, like I would say, probably like the 60s is starting this transition, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, as Detroit is becoming more of a black city. The cities surrounding Detroit are becoming they are getting different identities, but Dearborn historically has definitely had very strained relationship with black people. One of the stories I definitely remember, and he shared it when I had rest in peace Chokwe Lumumba. When we think about Mississippi, the former mayor of Mississippi, also member of the Republic of New Africa, and many other works of Chokwe, one of my big mentors. But he spoke of one of the times being a child in a car with friends, being assaulted by police officers just for driving through Dearborn. And this was just commonplace in practice. I don't know if people remember when I was in high school, the Lord and Taylor scandal that happened where
Security guard.
a security guard murdered a child just for being in the store. And that really held a black cloud over Fairlane Mall, the Lord and Taylor store, most definitely. And just it's been incidents like that historically in Dearborn, as we know. But that relationship now, in certain ways, with the Arab American History Museum, with new leadership in place, certain things are looking to shift. But as we shift in path, we also must honor the history that does exist, that does need to shift. That's been a Kari Frazier stance for a lot of these like Confederate statues. It's like, leave it up, put another plaque on the other side, because this is still a part of the history of America. We just want to acknowledge it for what it truly was and not what it is. I mean, even Columbus being named after so many cities across not just North America, not just America, but South America, the Caribbean, and all of this other stuff. Like, we just need to recognize what this is that gives the place. So as this, and having that tradition of mother, father, grandmother that understands some of this landscape, what is it like for you in your school journey? Where does your school journey begin?
Well, it began at Noble Middle School,
Okay.
Green Lawn, Oakman area. And then we moved from Green Lawn to Terry Street, which is where I actually grew up. I spent my preteen and teen years there. Went to Cadillac. We called it junior high. They call them middle schools now, and Cadillac has since closed. It's boarded up. And from Cadillac, before Cadillac, after leaving Noble, I went to Burns. That was an elementary school. And then after Burns, I went to Cadillac Junior High. And then from Cadillac Junior High, I went on to Cooley High School. My siblings and I wanted to go to different schools because we were like two years apart in terms of age, and we didn't want to keep going to school with each other. So I had my oldest brother, Melvin, went to Cass Tech, and then my older sister, Sandy, went to Murray Wright. I went to Cooley. Then my younger sister went to Cass, and my younger brother went to Henry Ford. So we didn't want to keep going to school with each other. We
You
wanted
guys
our own identity.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's split out. It
We
seems like
split.
wouldn't Mackenzie be like
No, Mackenzie was not.
the neighborhood
Mackenzie
school?
would have been, if we remained on Green Lawn and Oakman, it would have been Mackenzie High School. But because we moved to Schoolcraft, we were in the Cooley
Wow.
and Redford area.
Okay.
and Henry Ford. That's closer to us than McKenzie.
So we've had a couple Cooley Cardinals on this show before, and
Oh, Cooley.
yeah, and I see Aaron Alfalo like yelling the Cooley right now, but Cooley's tradition, and when we think about even really what's happening now, is I believe Life Remodeled has a proposal to purchase it, but
And Andrea Thompson and her group,
okay, all
who
right,
I support.
okay, I just know it's something on the books,
Yes.
but I just want to speak first to the many of the high schools that have like a lot of schools have closed in the city of
Yeah.
Detroit.
Too many.
Sad.
Mm-hmm.
Cooley was one of those institutions, like before we even get into the tradition of
Mm-hmm.
like the stuff inside the building, the outside, the architecture of Cooley is something
Unmatched.
that, okay, let's speak to it.
It's unmatched.
Mhm.
It was an extraordinarily beautiful school. And when I heard it was going to close in 2010, I couldn't believe it. I was just in shock. But they said it was due to low enrollment rates. I get that. But don't let it just sit there and just become dilapidated and become an eyesore. We had one of the most beautiful auditoriums outside of the Fox Theater. Beautiful marble and wood throughout the building. And to see it today is just heartbreaking to see what the Detroit Public School District has allowed to happen to that school. And I do blame the Detroit Public School District. If you're going to close a school, you have to make sure it is secure. And what I mean by that is make sure you have a relationship with the residents around so they can keep an eye out for it. Or you might have to get some security guards over there. You may have to have police officer over there to prevent what happens to a lot of our schools because they could be repurposed without having to spend a lot of money. But that school's been closed since 2010, and we're here today, 2023, and it's still closed. And people, for whatever reason, I don't think it's the folks in the city. I do believe it's folks outside because we have an appreciation for our schools. We do. And I do believe it was outsiders that came in. I don't have any proof, but I know what I saw on Facebook. They come in there and they loot, they steal, they take materials and marble, they extract it, and they use it they repurpose it for whatever reasons. And I blame the Detroit Public Schools District for not securing the buildings in a safe or more secure manner, because that happens oftentimes way too much, where we close a building and it's not properly secured, and then it's open to trespass, and then it collapses and then becomes an eyesore. Then the city has to demolish it. We got to do better by our buildings, and we just don't.
So your journey there, what was Cooley like for you? What do you remember? What were the standouts of being a Cardinal?
Yep, the teachers. We had a lot of caring teachers. My teachers looked like me. They lived in my neighborhood, not too far. I remember one of my teachers visiting my mother at home. It wasn't because I had done anything wrong. She just wanted to see who raised me. And she visited my home, and it was just an amazing experience. I only have fond memories of my matriculation through Cooley High School. And to see what it is today is just heartbreaking, but great experience. I can't say that I've maintained a lot of friendships from Cooley, because when I left Cooley, that in 2 months I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and I never really came back to Detroit. I went to college in Atlanta, Georgia, so the friendships that I could have maintained, I didn't. I began to develop new friends from the friends that I had attended college with, whom I'm still friends with today. So didn't do a good job at maintaining friendships from high school.
Okay, so let's talk Atlanta, ATL. You leave Cooley, you're going to Atlanta. So you're going from a chocolate city to another chocolate city.
Yes, sir.
What brings you to Atlanta?
Spelman College.
Spelman
Spelman College.
Okay.
I had a teacher, Mr. Cunningham, who I knew nothing about Spelman prior to. I was just going to go to Michigan State, like everybody else was going to. My locker partner, Yolanda Walker, was going to Michigan State, so I said, "Well, I'll just go to Michigan State and we can, room together." But he pulled me to the side and he says, "You get out of Michigan, get out of Detroit, And we have a young lady, Patricia Marshall. I'll never forget it. He says, "I'll connect you to her. She's a freshman there, and when you get there, she'll be a sophomore, and she'll be able to look out for you, be like your big sister." I said, "Spelman College?" He said, "Yeah." And he gave me couldn't Google it. So he was just giving me information that he had acquired about Spelman College, being an all-girls school, private for black girls. And he said, "You would fit in great." And on that advice alone, I applied and got accepted, and enjoyed every day of it. And I have no regrets about leaving Detroit, going to Spelman College. As a matter of fact, today, that was probably one of the best decisions I ever made, is to leave Detroit, go to the number one HBCU,
There's
Spelman College. Oh
some
my
people
God.
from Morehouse and FAMU that are like throwing, and
I
Howard, they're
know.
like they're like throwing a water
We
bottle at the
are. I
computer
know.
screen, like
We are. We are. We are.
rattlers.
I'm proud. I'm very proud. I had an opportunity, and I don't think I know for a fact I would not have had the opportunities and experiences that I had I gone elsewhere. My reading teacher was Martin Luther King's sister, and Miss Ferris.
Okay.
Miss King Ferris, and that was an amazing experience. And she was just very firm. And I remember going to school with Dexter King, Martin Luther King's son. He went to Morehouse. I was at Spelman. I remember, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was O'Neill Swanson. So I went to school with a lot of folks who come from a different type of background than myself. And it was just a beautiful experience. And I remember Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee coming on campus, and I was their escort. I escorted them around campus. And I remember, I can't remember the track star's name. I was her escort. So Benjamin Mays, I had a chance to meet him and introduce him. So those type of experiences, Mr. Frazier, I would not have had I gone to Michigan State University or a larger university. I believe that when I went to Spelman, it just became like a second family for me, because the professors there look like me. Not all of them, but they took an interest in my personal well-being as well as my academic well-being. They wanted to make sure that all of us were okay and safe. We had a dorm mother. We had a curfew for 10:45 p.m. I don't know if the curfew still exists today, but it certainly did back in the 80s. And guys could not be on the campus. They couldn't be in your room. You had to be in a space where everybody could see and hear. So you didn't have a lot of privacy, but it was a wonderful experience. And I'm grateful that one of my three daughters graduated from Spelman in 2018.
So, with that, and I have a couple other questions, but let's just start here when we think about that journey. I do believe the HBCU experience opens up the lens of many people to understand that the Black experience in America is definitely not a monolith. You have families that with traditions and wealth that reaches back to even schools like a Spelman and Morehouse. They're paying forward to say, like, okay, we paid our way out of enslavement. And this is, where you're going to go. This is a tradition. So you have people like that. Then you have like first generation. I'm the first person to go to college. You have Nigerians, Ghanaians, even Black itself becomes a different experience along that path. What was it like just drinking in that feel of being on that campus, and how did going to Spelman open up your ideas of what Blackness in America is?
Well, I wasn't the first person to go to college in my family. My older brother was. He went to Wayne State and then John Hopkins. And then my sister went to Saginaw Valley. She was the first Black homecoming queen for Saginaw Valley State University. So I was not the first, but I was the first to attend at HBCU. I was the first one to leave the state of Michigan and attend college. And that whole experience was just amazing, to be surrounded by wealth. Where I grew up, it wasn't the wealthiest community, but when you get to the Atlanta University Center, some of my classmates had sports cars, two-seaters, convertibles, Mercedes, and it was like, I went to school with Lerone Bennett's son, Lerone Bennett Jr., who was the editor-in-chief of Jet Magazine in Ebony. And that's who I went to school with. It was nothing but Black wealth And I had never experienced that before, but I knew I belonged. I did not ever feel one day that I didn't belong. Even though a lot of my classmates had more resources than I did, I never felt that I didn't have access to those resources or wouldn't get access. We were just bonding. We were just family. We all wanted something different. We all wanted something better. And some's experience were different than mine, richer than mine, more pleasant than mine, but I never felt out of place. I knew when I got to Spelman, I belonged.
And I also want to give this lens, less Spelman, but just Atlanta in the time in the 80s. When we think about Atlanta in the 80s, you have, like I say, from one chocolate city to another, but you also have two leaders of both these cities. Maynard Jackson in the shadow and what he cast, and his legacy is very, I don't think it's acknowledged for the intellect and how he would execute things, especially when we think of what has become of the Atlanta International Airport and what that transacts, and that's completely a Maynard Jackson vision, and also Coleman Young. So you're leaving Detroit, which with a different type of Black empowerment lens in the '80s, and going to Atlanta with a different type of Black empowerment lens in the '80s. What did you notice that? I know you're younger, so you may not be as politically aware, but what was the pulse of just being in Atlanta then versus Detroit then?
It was an extension. It was an extension of the cultures were kind of similar. Maybe the dialect or the accents weren't the same, but the culture were similar, very strong similarities. So to me, leaving Detroit was just an extension of going to Atlanta was just an extension of leaving Detroit. It was really no different because a lot of Detroiters were down on campus, mostly from Cass Tech. It was just myself and one other from Cooley, but for the most part, it was Cass Tech we had a Detroit club. I was, Miss Michigan runner-up, my freshman year. We were very cohesive. So you had the Philadelphia club, you had the Detroit club. So we made sure we stayed connected. So if somebody was going home for the weekend, you wanted to hitch a ride, you could go. So you had your pockets. It wasn't cliques, but we were just there as support systems. So when I got there, I met Detroiters day one. On Morehouse's campus, they became your big brothers. And then on Spelman's campus, we were cohesive. And each major Black city who had a number of students on the campuses were cohesive. They had clubs, and I think they still have those clubs. But I wanted to go back to what you mentioned about Maynard Jackson. Maynard Jackson's aunt was my English teacher. Her name was Dr. Millicent Dobbs, Dobbs. And the Dobbs sisters, there were 5 of them. They graduated from Spelman College. And one of the sisters was Maynard Jackson's mom. And one of the sisters was his aunt, who happened to be Millicent Dobbs Jordan. She was my English teacher for 3 years.
Interesting. So that campus, as people know, if you've seen the movie School Days, it's also like the on-campus experience, and this is often talked about in Black Atlanta. Like you have the on-campus experience versus the Atlanta experience, that classic scene, and this is what's so funny because Spike Lee from Morehouse and Samuel Jackson delivers a great performance in that. He's a Morehouse grad too, so he could embody like this relationship between you have people in a school experiencing Atlanta different than people that are residents of Atlanta. In the 80s, I think, is really like an eye-opening time. And right now, I would say Houston is definitely like kind of that city for Black folks now because people are like, ain't nobody really from Houston. And it's like, no, I really know some Black folks from Houston. And their experience is different than the people that are coming there. What do you remember just like of Atlanta culture, not like from campus, or most times when you were engaging in Atlanta, you were in that group of Detroiters or with your people from Spellhouse?
Okay, so, and we didn't call it Spellhouse at the time. That's like a new phenomenon. Yeah, my daughter's generation, they call it Spellhouse. They have sweatshirts that say Spellhouse. But quite frankly, I didn't go to school with a lot of folks from Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And people think that the majority of Spelmanites are from Atlanta, but when in the 80s, they were not.
Mm-hmm.
I remember matriculating through Spelman with very few young ladies from the city of Atlanta. Most of the students that I went to school with were from Chicago, Detroit, Philly, and from some parts of Africa. But I went to school with very few, from what I can remember, maybe a handful in my class of young ladies who were actually residents of the city of Atlanta.
So did that impact like your travels in and around Atlanta?
Not really. I mean, my first month on campus, I found a job. So I worked in the Omni Center downtown Detroit. I learned how to catch the bus. Hey, I'm from Detroit, so I'm not afraid to navigate the city on my own, which I did because I had to survive. My parents didn't, I didn't come back. I didn't come from wealth. I knew that if I was going to be there, I had to make it work. I could not come back home empty-handed, and I was determined to graduate from Spelman College by any means necessary. So within the first month, I found a job downtown in the Omni Center at a clothing store, and I kept that job all the way through until I graduated.
See.
So I was able to, and I didn't have a car. Never had a car on campus. My parents never visited me on campus.
You just you made the I forget what that is. The you made public transit down in Atlanta work. I forget what the name of that public transit is.
MARTA.
There we go.
Yes.
So after Spelman, what's happening?
Okay. After Spelman, spent a few years working in Detroit public school system.
Oh, so you come back to Detroit?
I come back to Detroit.
Okay.
For personal reasons, and didn't go back to Atlanta. I would go back and visit homecoming, visit some friends, hang out, but I never went back to live. I didn't think I was ever going to come back to Detroit to live, but fell in love, came back, and started, got married, and then decided to go to law school. So graduated from law school, and as I'm in law school, I'm having children, and so I'm the mother of 4. And, the rest is history. I didn't go back to Atlanta only for visiting, and started focusing on my 4 children. I was determined to be a stay-at-home mom, but still worked. So I had a small business that I ran out of my home, and I was able to stay at home full-time for the first years of all of my children's lives.
Okay. Now, law school. What was your interest and passion in law? Was it always that? Was it one of those things where it's like, nah, I got a fight that I want to take up here or learn about, or what was getting you crystallized into that?
You know what? It was a conversation I was having with some classmates from Spelman. They were going to take the LSAT. Well, I said, hell, I'll take it too. And so I never really practiced law. Didn't pass the bar exam, but I still graduated from law school, and I still use my legal education and my knowledge of the law in what I do now. But we were just having a conversation, and they said, well, I'm going to take the LSAT. And I said, well, I'll take it. I really wasn't prepared, and it was never a goal of mine or a dream of mine to be a lawyer. I thought I would just be like a teacher and then elevate to principal, because my degree is in English and secondary education. So my goal was to teach secondary English and literature and journalism. But just conversations with some of my Spelman sisters, we decided we were going to take the LSAT. So we did.
So with that passion in education, because I know you've worked in education, what has been what shoes have you worn in that theater of education? Because Lord knows, more attention. As much as people talk about young people and we need to do this for the kids and we need to do this for that, it seems like the people closest to them, teachers, are the people least listened to. And definitely students are oftentimes forgotten about in these systems of looking to build, this is a Kari opinion, looking to build formulas and infrastructure that treats children like it's a factory, instead of looking at it like, nah, you have to really adapt, because one child, in all of my experience, one student can change the whole culture of a classroom. What has been your journey in education, and staying committed to that, and then also being a mother? I know that adds other layers to it.
So first of all, I'm convinced that education starts in the home. It's not a cliche. The first teachers are the parents.
Yeah.
It's the environment that the child grows up in. It's the home that the child grows up in. It's not a schoolhouse. It's not a teacher. It's me. It's the dad. And sometimes that's not always the situation in a lot of households. The mother is absent. The dad is absent. Maybe an aunt is raising, a grandmother's raising the children. But that does not negate the fact that the true education, the beginning of education, starts in the home. That's where the child is developed. That's where the child learns to read. That's where the child develops a relationship with Jesus Christ, because I'm a believer. That's where the child goes to church. That's where a child learns the importance of money, financial literacy. That's the important, I'm hoping I did. Mothers and fathers are responsible for making sure that they have a sense of integrity, honesty, no stealing, no lying, just basic qualities and characteristics start in the home and are, to me, instilled in a child by his or her parent if they are there. You have a lot of situations where children don't have both parents. Some children don't have a parent at all. I understand that, but I'm saying for my situation, I can only speak from my situation. I was determined to make sure my children were school ready when they went to school. And one teacher called about my second oldest daughter, Candace, because she was 4 years old and could identify when one of her classmates off a sheet of paper were not in class. And the teacher called me like astonished, just shocked that my daughter, who's 4.5 years old, could tell her he's not here today. She's not here today. She knew her classmates and she can identify their names on the attendance sheet. So that didn't start with that teacher. That started with me and my and their dad. So, that's not even a perfect situation. There is no perfect situation, but I will submit to you that the learning, the education, the values, the appreciation of life and people and respect for life, it starts in the home. And I think that's why we have a lot of problems in our society today, because those values were not shared with some of the folks who are committing a lot of the crimes. And maybe they were shared, I'm not sure. But we have a lot of ills in society because we lack basic values. We lack just basic respect for life and for one another. And that's why, you can have somebody shoot somebody and because I looked at you wrong. You can have somebody shoot somebody because I stepped on your gym shoe. You can have somebody because you looked at my woman or you looked at my man. We don't have a respect for life. And I'm not saying that they missed that when they were growing up, but they missed something.
I do believe that, especially living in a neighborhood like mine, and I love my neighborhood, but I do recognize that a lot of people feel trapped here. The conditioning and how people feel. Crime has been always something of opportunity. And especially when we think of violent crimes where it'll oppress upon another, that opportunity also may be the opportunity to release whatever those emotions, whatever that psychological, that metaphysical ill is going on. And in our society also, this is a Kari opinion, has accepted, especially in America, the fact that violence will exist. It's just a matter of how, why, and when, which is a deeper moral question.
Yeah.
When we review how things function. Like even when we watch television, it's like usually, okay, the bad guy is murdered at the end, but we applaud that. But we're still seeing the idea of it, there are circumstances where violence is needed. Then we get into a person's moral compass, as you say, like the background, the conditioning, the family. And then nowadays, I mean, just this device alone, even with family, can skew a person's response to things. Classroom is a unique place because you are young. You're developing that, as I say, your frontal lobe. You're building that in character and everything. And you're right that sometimes a lot of students entering the classroom don't have the advantages of others, and a lot of times just maybe possibly crying out for attention.
Yes.
What's lacking, some of those insecurities,
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that'll go on.
Mm-hmm.
What was your approach in the classroom to ground students around learning? But first, you may have to lead with love,
Mm-hmm.
just to even present, verbs, adverbs, and pronouns and proper nouns and things like that.
Just trying to address the barriers or the blockades or the apprehensions that the child brings into the classroom. My students were high school students, but still some apprehension, still some barriers, still some blockades, still some, idiosyncrasies. And you spent time just gaining their trust. If you can get the trust of a student, I do believe you can teach that student. If you get the respect of the student, that student is willing to learn from you and glean from you. But if there's not a trust relationship, or if there's not a respect in the relationship, it's reciprocal, then I don't believe that a child is going to be eager to learn from you if they don't respect you. So that's the first thing. You got to establish respect, and then you can get them to listen to you, because a lot of students will come into the classroom, they're not even engaged. Their mind is, far off from what you're saying to them. They're not even paying attention because maybe they didn't eat that morning. Maybe they watched their mom, be subjected to domestic violence the night before. Maybe they're homeless. Maybe, they don't know where their next meal is going to come from. So you got to really, it's a task, but teachers do it every single day. They get in there, it's a grind, and you got to find out, because each individual student's case or situation is different and unique to that student. So is it time consuming? Yes. So that's the first thing you have to do when you are in the classroom, from my perspective, is to gain the trust of the students. So if something is happening with them that shouldn't be happening, they're more likely to share that with you if they believe they can trust you and that you're going to try to help them. And hats off to all the teachers today. It's more difficult today than it was just 30 years ago when I was out there. Because after, teaching for a while, transitioned to administration, to human resources and employee relations, but never forgot that experience, still love the experience in the classroom because you're touching lives. And what I don't like about us in Detroit, Detroiters, we call our students babies. I went to two high school graduations last week, and they were referred to as babies. I went to a middle school graduation and participated in all three, and they were referred to as babies. And I would correct whoever was saying it, pull them to the side. They're not babies. They're human beings, and there's not a baby in this classroom. Babies are infants up to when they become a toddler. That's who a baby is. But we black folks in Detroit routinely, regularly refer to high schoolers as babies. I know it's like a term of endearment, but our words have power. They have life and death in them. And to me, that stunts them. To me, that interferes with their growth and maturity if we're continuing to refer to them as babies. All black people, and I'm going to say it, it's a general statement, Mr. Frazier, but everywhere I go, we refer to our students as babies. They don't do it anywhere else, to my knowledge, but in Detroit. And to me, it's crippling. It's a handicap, and it doesn't do them any good to refer to them as a baby. No, you're a young scholar. No, you're a student. No, you're a young adult. No, you're a youth. You're anything but a baby, because we're calling them something that they're not, expecting them to act a different way. So if you're calling a grown man a boy, which routinely, black men were called. My dad was called a boy in Mississippi. He was a grown man. He would often tell me those stories. Well, that's going to make my dad kind of change his behavior and be more subservient in his behavior because of what somebody's referring to him as. So I think, and I'm not going to stop saying it, we need to stop referring to our students in Detroit as babies. And I know, again, it's a term of endearment, but it's a term of disempowering our students because we're calling them something that we don't want them to be. It's just, it's kind of hypocritical. We want them to be mature, but you're referring to them as a baby. Babies are not mature. They're not even expected to be mature. So what we're saying is we're expecting less from our students than what they're capable of. Not saying they don't perform, because they do, but we continue to refer to them as babies, and then they have baby-like behavior, and then we scold them like a baby when they're not even a baby. So I know the Bible says when I was a child, I did as a child would do, but when I became a man, I put away those childish things. And so wherever I go, it doesn't matter to me if I offend you or not. Stop calling our students babies. It's not good for them. It's not who they are. They're young adults. They're young people. Call them that. Call them young scholars. But we have to change how we, and I know, I'll say it for the third time, it's a term of endearment, but we shouldn't use that particular term of endearment. We got to change it.
Well, yeah.
And that was a mouthful. I'm sorry.
No. I like that, and I was just going to transition to from working with young people. Now you're dealing with everybody. Politics. What led for you to drive this boat into the realm of politics?
Wow.
From that, because it's similar, but now we're dealing with the young, the old, everyone, business owners, like different people at different positions. I do look at I look at a person in the position of especially a legislator, as I do feel that oftentimes many people don't even understand the role of what a legislator does. But definitely the legislator in a city like Detroit, you're going to be the person that interacts with the general public way more often than a lot of the people. And I don't even want to necessarily just say the mayor, because we have a very executive-led office. Go back and check the Detroit is Different, Riverwise, breakdowns of the roles of city council, of mayor, of charter commission, of police commission. Like, it's certain things that are auspices and things done, but the mayor's shadow, just due to the government structure of the city of Detroit, has a lot of influence over all of our city services. But the person usually interacted with most will be the city council member.
Yeah, the
So it's a
body.
very interesting position to be in. And then when you say, like, well, really, you're just focusing on the budget and some votes for ordinances, which I don't even know if most people know ordinance is a city law. That's really the role, but just due to the culture and our people, that role has shifted and what you're going to face. What led you into the politics world?
Wow. Well, I never aspired to be a politician. Love politics, though. I mean, I follow it. I vote. I actually vote in person. I know there are other options, but I choose to go in person. I took my children when they were young and took them into the voting booth with me. So love politics, love talking about it, love not really debating it, but just discussing it, accepting people where they are and their views. I don't try to, convince anybody to look at things the way I see them through my lenses. They're my lenses, and I look at things the way I do. Because I can, but I never aspired to be a politician. I just was minding my own business and, preparing for retirement in a couple years. And I was in education. I was working for a charter school management company and in HR after leaving DPS. And I had been there for almost 3 years. This is, might blow some people's minds, might say, oh, that, I just know that I heard God's voice. And I pray every day. I meditate. I read the Bible, and I believe in Jesus Christ. And I just, Mr. Frazier, it was just, some people say I heard a voice. I did hear a voice, and I knew that voice was from the Lord, and was in January of 2021. I was at home alone. So nobody was there talking to me, and people, you can believe it if you want to, but this is my story. And I heard the Lord's voice. I just said, and I looked around, I'm like, I think I just heard from the Lord. I hadn't been praying about anything because I knew I was preparing to, you know, count all my pennies and prepare for, dot all my I's and cross all my T's and prepare another few years to retire. So I was planning to retire from this charter school management company. And then early one morning, probably a little after midnight in January of 2021, I heard a voice. The voice simply said, you're going to run for city council and you're going to win. And I heard it. It was very clear. And I looked around. Nobody was there. And so, and then I saw, you know, could scare you. I'm not sure. I saw a finger like this, the way I'm pointing at you. And it just appeared out of nowhere. I saw it. It was an image. And it says, you're going to run just like this. You're going to run for city council and you're going to win. And I knew I had heard from the Lord. And this is the truth. And I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never run for office before, never aspired. My name had never been on a ballot, never petitioned to do anything. But loved politics, was in touch with what was going on in my neighborhood and what should have been going on but wasn't. So I started doing a little bit of research and, you know, did a little research about who would be my opponent. He had run for office for 16 times, and he finally won in 2017. I didn't have anybody to support me except for a couple of my family members. And not, you know, my entire family wasn't behind this at all because they thought I was just going through some type of midlife experience or crisis. And I'm like, no, this is different. And I'd never done anything like this in my entire life. I'm pretty conservative. And, you know, I walk that straight line, don't deviate from it, you know, work, just like my dad and my mom, pay your bills, you know, try not to owe anybody anything, pay off your house, pay off your car, try to avoid a lot of debt, and live your good life. And that's all I was doing. And, you know, hanging out with my family. And so met a couple people, was scared to tell them that I needed their help or if they would be willing to volunteer, shared it with maybe 2 or 3 people. And they said yes. You said, we don't know how far this is going to go, but we like you, we love you, we respect you.
We
know,
support you.
Yeah, we're going to support you. And that's the rest is history. So I ended up with about 6 core people who pushed us across the finish line. So I didn't have a large apparatus. Mr. Frazier, I didn't have a lot of money. I used my payroll checks because I was still working.
Yeah.
And my dad at this point, because in 2019, the pandemic came, so I moved my dad out of his apartment because at that point, my mom had just passed in 2018. So around 2019, early 2020, I moved my dad in with me, with my family to take care of him because the pandemic, he was elderly, 89 years old.
Because that's what we do.
That's what we do.
That's what we do.
So that happened, and still working a full-time job, caring for my dad, and never miss a day's work while campaigning. Never campaigned during work hours. I campaigned before I went to work, and I campaigned after I got off work, but not before making sure my dad was okay. Make sure he ate before I left, make sure he ate when I got off work, and knock doors. And that was the key to my success, was knocking doors.
Yeah, I think hitting that pavement. And you did.
I hit it.
You definitely were all around. I remember seeing you. What has the experience been since being in this position now? Because I'm sure now a lot, more lights have turned on, having more understandings of how intricate and then also how massive the corporation of the city of Detroit is.
Yeah,
it's a massive organization.
It's a massive organization, and you don't know that when you're on the outside looking in. When you get into it and you look out, it's different than being out looking in, but actually being in looking out. Your perspective, your viewpoint, your vantage point is much broader, much deeper, because you see it from a different angle. And this has been a life-changing experience for me and my family. I work harder now than I ever have worked in my life. I enjoyed the work. I'm beginning to enjoy it more and more because I understand what is required of me. There is no pre-training to run to once you get elected. There's no training book for you. There is no manual. You have your colleagues who have been there who can answer some questions, but there is no training.
And wait, let me say this too.
Ain't no
Also,
training.
you have to be mindful of, and I'm not even saying it from like a, this isn't, I don't even know, like a soap opera or anything. Like, you got to watch the advice you get, but you also have to remember that, in my humble opinion, from just being an observer and a commenter and a podcaster on a lot of the politics things, different politicians have different levels of support. So the lens of how a person like, I like her. Let's just throw that out there. And she's doing well. Last time I saw her, but like a Brenda Jones, that city council member, city council president for a while, that now has retired, moved on, had a strong union support. Not saying that anything outside the union she wouldn't support, but the lens of a lot of things was like from a union-based perspective. My godmother, I don't know how many people know this, like Joanne Watson has a lot of African-centered support. Also, just like from running the YWCA, a lot of women's group support. Like, so some of that support base impacts some of the ways, the people, the functionality, the organizational structure. And I'm using former people as opposed to current people, just more so just to, not to, Lord knows I get an email from somebody or something, but like a Sheila Cockrell had a lot of relationships with a lot of business developers downtown. So like some of these things will impact the way things would flow through how a person will present information and what they're going to advocate for, and then pulling in things. And then the savviness of politics, or sometimes it's what people don't like. It's like, okay, it's some quid pro quo, meaning I'm going to support you on this and I need you to support me on that. And also as bills move closer and ordinances, as that paperwork moves further down the way in the legislature, as different people buy into it, it's going to reanimate things usually, because to get my support, I'm going to want some of my say in this. Some of my say may change something a little bit, but that little bit, when you get into like these legal attorneys, these municipal assessors and things like that, they know how to like say, oh, well, if this happens, then that can happen. And when that happens, then this opens up. A classic example of this is that great 14th documentary that on Netflix. So like the 14th Amendment, or the 13th Amendment, I'm sorry. The 13th Amendment, great documentary, talks about how, our people will no longer face enslavement in this nation. But as long as that concurrent law passed through, it also passed through the whole concept of a corporation being separate from a person. So as much as we were given freedom, corporations were given freedom to basically be like the limited liability corporation. So I could run a business, do things that could harm a person, but the person that will be reliable and responsible for that would be a corporation, the same way Black people now have quote unquote freedoms. So this is just parts of the ways that politics functions.
Yeah. That was great. I don't align myself with the unions. I respect the unions. My dad and my mom was a union person. I was in unions when I worked for Detroit Public School System. I don't align myself with organizations per se. I don't align myself with the business community. Maybe I should, but I have not. I don't get into relationships or agreements where I owe you something. I'm free. I vote on behalf of the people every single time. My support comes from the people, the everyday average D2 resident. And you saw that at the coffee hour.
That we hosted together.
Yeah, you hosted
But
it.
it's your event, but coffee and conversation.
Yeah.
Monthly. We're not July because the other holiday and other summer things, but it's coming back in August. So if you follow council member, you're gonna see a coffee and conversation at 8:00. You're gonna be able to get a cup of Joe and probably some fruit and some other snacks, but also get a chance to engage and meet not just council member, but other people that are working in this large infrastructure of the city of Detroit? Because this is a massive infrastructure.
Yeah, we had the governmental director, I think that's his title, Marshall Bullock, from the mayor's office. We had Tammy Daniels from the Detroit Land Bank there. We have different folks coming out to the coffee hour just to share information with our everyday residents. So I can't say that I have all this support from these organizations or these businesses or these unions. I can't say that right now. I'm in my second year, but in office of a 4-year term. But what I can say to you is I touch every corner of my district. I know what's happening in my district on a personal level, intimate level, and I'm in touch with my residents. So whether or not I'm in touch with the businesses in Midtown or downtown, whether I have their support, doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me if I have the union's support. I didn't get their support when I ran for office and won. And the person who I was running against had all of that support. So that, I'm telling anybody who's listening, if you're wanting to run for office, don't be discouraged because you don't have all these so-called connections or access. You just do the work and you get to where you need to be and desire to be and are supposed to be. So I can't sit here and tell you that I have those relationships. I can't sit here and tell you that I'm even interested in having those relationships. I wasn't on Mackinac 2 weeks ago. I chose not to go. I could have gone, but I chose not to go. I went for the first time last year and thought it was a waste of taxpayer dollars, and I say that publicly. It was a waste of taxpayer dollars. Now, everybody went. Some of my colleagues, the mayor was there. Most people who should be there were there. I didn't feel that I needed to be there. And I didn't feel there was a lot that I would accomplish by being there. So I didn't go. And I probably won't be going back as a sitting council person, not unless the agenda changes and there's some real learning that occurs. But a lot of people talk about, the policy conference at Mackinac. It's no big deal to me. I went last year for the first time. I had my pen and paper in hand and my tote bag ready to learn something, and I didn't learn a damn thing. So to me, it was a waste of my time. Beautiful island, so I got that experience. But I'm going to tell you, who's who was there, I guess. I mean, I don't know all the who's who in Detroit.
Well, it's
I'm not a who's who, and I just chose not to go, and I didn't miss anything by not going.
well, as a person that just I have a passion for studying a lot of the city of Detroit's history, especially like Black Detroit history. So yeah, it's some depending upon the world, some who's who. But I still think this is a cliquish town, and you are a who's who in a lot of circles. Let's put it like that, because people do appreciate you, and you are one of the council members that we can engage and touch base with. Let alone, I mean, even coming on Detroit is different.
Yeah.
Lord knows, coming on Detroit is different. It's like what are we gonna do to Kari? Kari's always. It's like Kari's cool. Kari's mad cool. But I definitely will challenge on behalf of speaking like you, on behalf of people that I think may not get in the room, and just making sure people are aware. That's what Detroit is different is about, the awareness.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm going to get to my last questions and we wrapping.
Okay.
But first, how do people get in contact with you?
Well, I'm easy to get in contact with. My number is 224-4535, 224-4535, and my email address is councilmembercalloway@detroitmi.gov. Tomorrow morning, if you want to meet and greet me, I'll be walking at Palmer Park. We start at 8, we end at 9. I am there every single Thursday for 1 hour. And then after the walk, I do spend some time, engaging, answering questions, writing down concerns, and I have staff there to make sure that if I don't capture some information or issue, they're there to capture it. So I'm out there. And a lot of the businesses that I interact with are in District 2. So you'll see me on the Avenue of Fashion. You'll see me on 6 Mile, 7 Mile, 8 Mile. I'm out in the community. So join me tomorrow. And again, my telephone number is 224-4535. And my email address is councilmembercalloway@detroitmi.gov. Again, I'll be at Palmer Park tomorrow morning from 8 to 9. And then in another week or so, we're going to start our weekly bike ride throughout District 2.
All right. So with that being said, let's get to the classic questions. Very first car, year, make, and model, year you got it.
It was a Toyota Corolla stick shift. I didn't know how to drive it. I got it from Page Toyota on Telegraph in Southfield. My dad had to drive it home. It was all I could afford. Had no air, barely had heat, black cloth seats, or were they black leather? I think they were black, like fall leather seats. That was my very first car. I bought it the year I graduated from Spelman.
Okay. All right. With that, where was the first place you went when you got it?
Back home because I couldn't drive it.
Did you ever pop the clutch? Because usually, if people don't know, did you ever pop it?
I don't think I popped it. Would you destroy the car?
Well, not necessarily, but you definitely need to go get some transmission work done after.
I don't remember if I ever popped it, but I learned how to drive it, and I was able to share that car with my sister who was at Howard. And after
Did she know how to drive?
She knew how to drive it, and after she graduated from Howard, she gave it to my younger brother, who drove it until the wheels fell off. I think it went to 200,000 miles.
Wow. Okay, so you had the vision, and he pushed it to the limit.
He pushed it.
Okay. So you can always any Thanksgiving, it's like, hey, I get first.
Yeah. That's right.
Keep rolling.
That's right.
All right. You're the DJ at the end of the fireworks, Woodward and Jefferson. You get to play 3 songs. What songs you playing?
Like real songs?
Yeah.
God, what songs?
It could be any. I mean, it could be gospel music. It could be whatever you want to play.
Okay, so this might seem a little corny, probably way before your time, but I really am a Jackson 5 fan. Not the Jacksons.
We like Michael Jackson, and Detroit is different.
I mean, I like.
Wait.
I like the Motown sound.
The Jackson 5 with Michael Jackson. So really, it's like Michael Jackson and the other guys. No offense to the other guys, but that's a Kari phrase. I'm making that stance for all of Detroit is different. I know Piper Carter agrees with me. So yes, we support Michael. The rest of the Jacksons, if I ever got a Jackson ticket and Michael wasn't there, it'd be like, man.
Yeah, that ain't the Jacksons.
Exactly. Okay.
So my favorite, all of their songs, as the original Jackson 5, from the very first ones, like, ABC, 1, 2, 3, got to be there. I mean, I'm old school. And then I love Stevie Wonder. Anything and everything he's ever made. Keys to the what is it? The songs
to the Key of Life.
Yes, I had a chance to see him a few years ago downtown, and it was my very first time. So absolutely Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, and of course Whitney Houston was my favorite female vocalist. She had an incredible voice. And then if I had to do religion, it would be religious singers or gospel singers would probably be BB and CeCe Winans.
Okay. All right.
Those are my favorite.
There we go. So of that, it's like, I think like Heaven from BB and CeCe.
Yeah.
And probably I Want You Back from the Jackson 5. And then from Stevie, I guess Do I Do. Like that'd be like an interesting mix.
Yeah.
Last question. You could rename Woodward after one Detroiter. Who would it be and why?
It would probably be Rosa L. Gregg. And Rosa L. Gregg was doing some things that were trailblazing back in the 40s and the 50s. And it would be Rosa L. Gregg. And the reason why I say Rosa L. Gregg, Dr. Rosa L. Gregg, because she was from Georgia. She graduated number 1 in her class from Morris Brown in the 30s, early 40s. And she came to Detroit. She married Mr. Gregg. Her maiden name was Slade, Slade. And I say I would name it after her because that would provoke an interest in Googling her name or researching her name and learning why, who she was and why a street like would be named after a woman like that. She was trailblazing before there was a Rosa Parks. She, to me, is the ultimate Rosa. When I think about Rosa, I don't think about Rosa Parks. She did some phenomenal things, changed the world, really, literally the world. But Rosa Gregg did some incredible things, and her mark is still on the corner of Brush and Ferry. She had the foresight to invest in properties, and that property is still there. Is the clubhouse of the Detroit Association of Colored Women's Clubs, founded in 1895 in Boston, Massachusetts, and its Detroit branch is right there on the corner of Brush and Ferry. And that house is still there. And so nothing but the utmost respect for her legacy, her memory. I think about her all the time. I think about some of the tribulations that she encountered and experienced. She served 3 presidents. She was friends with Jackie Kennedy. She was friends with Eleanor Roosevelt, and she was friends with Lady Bird Johnson. She was in the White House when there was no other black person in the White House. She helped to save the Frederick Douglass home, which is now a national treasure and a landmark, historic. She and the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs out of Washington, D.C., where they're still headquartered, I think, on R Street, saved that home and transferred that home to the national parks. And she was the first black person to give a sitting president a gift. It was an oil painting. It's all online. You can look it up. She gave an oil painting from Frederick Douglass's home of Abraham Lincoln to a sitting president, John F. Kennedy. The portraits are there. The pictures are there. We can prove it. You can just Google her name. And so she's just one of them, one of the unsung heroes that I wish the world would know about. But I'm doing my part, and Jamon Jordan is doing his part to continue her legacy and to make sure people know who she was and who she is today, even though she's no longer with us physically. Her mark is still evident in our everyday life, but we just don't know. Sometimes, people will come by and touch a certain thing. You say, who did that? Well, she's that person. Who was she? So Dr. Rosa L. Slade Gregg, I would name Woodward after. That's a long answer to your
Okay.
to your
Nah,
question.
I like it. Thank you so much. And thank you for that information. And we like Detroit Black History. We love that here at
Yeah.
Detroit is Different. Thank you so much.
My
And we
pleasure.
will definitely be supportive in everything moving forward, especially if it's for the people, for the community. That's where Detroit is Different stands. All right.
All right.
Peace.
Peace. Thank you.